So this whole session is nicely named How to Flourish at Data Storytelling. So we talk about data visualization all the time, and I will use that phrase a lot. But really, what we really want to get to the crux of, or get really good at, is storytelling. So giving people a message or telling a story from our data, so that they remember it, they engage with it, it resonates with them, and it kind of engages them, and that is kind of slightly further on than just pure data visualization. So I will talk about storytelling quite a lot in this. That will be kind of the main focus of this, with visualization being the kind of technique to help tell the story. So why I'll take you through the agenda, how I'm going to split up the session, and first of all, starting off, why is data storytelling so important? And it's become increasingly important. This is our nice little text annotator template, so we can click on why and get some more information here. But it's become increasingly important because there's just so much data being created from the digitalization of from the internet, from the digitalization and moving towards more and more digitalization of our whole lifestyles and the world that we live in. And so data is everywhere, but it's meaningless if people don't understand it. And so that's why we find people moving much more towards being very analytical and data savvy in their everyday work and running of businesses and making decisions, is to find meaning in the data. But also there's this extra bit that you can find meaning in the data, but you need that to inform people and for people to act on it. And if you don't inspire them to understand it or act on it, it's kind of pointless understanding it. And so this is where this data storytelling piece comes from. It's the hard data and the analytical understanding mixed with the human communication. So helping people to understand the information and informing them and then enabling them to act on it. So that is why it is becoming more and more important, and something that in nearly every walk of life, people are going to have to get very much better at this and build their skill sets up in this area. So next on the agenda, I will go through the kind of skill set that you need to be good at data storytelling, and that you do need to be good at a lot of things. So you kind of have to be a statistician, understand numbers, understand data, be very analytical. You have to be a journalist. You have to understand how to communicate easily and simply to people, pick out good messages and stories that will resonate with them. And you have to be a designer. You have to have an eye for the visual impact of something and how to design a visual in a good way. And this is a real amalgamation of skills. And so very often you can't get this all in one person. And so it's good to have mixed teams or mixed skill sets within teams to be able to deliver the best possible storytelling or visual content that you can. So we will look through these skills, we will go through a best practice framework that I actually developed at the Bank of England, but is relevant for everyone. And it's meant to be just a very simple framework, just 5 simple steps of what you should be thinking about when you're trying to communicate a story or tell a story from your data. So that you kind of always just think back to these 5 simple things. Have I ticked them off? And this will enable you to become the ultimate storyteller of data. So to help kind of bring that framework to life, I will go through a range of examples, which I find are very helpful for people to understand how I step through that process and make a kind of good visual, a bad visual, or how I turn the story in my data into a visual storytelling piece that is understandable and engaging. So the majority of this session will be going through a lot of examples and quite chunk of those examples are very basic chart types, so line and bar charts, but you'll be amazed at how many small decisions that you should make and what you should think about, even in the most basic of kind of visual practice, visual chart types, how those small decisions can make such a huge impact on the ability of your visual to tell a good story. And then in the kind of second part of the examples, we'll go through to more kind of complicated chart types like scatter and hierarchy, where you can tell a richer story. And then lastly, we will kind of bring this all together into kind of fully animated stories, and how you kind of can step a reader through something quite complicated, but make it much more easily understandable by using specifically the story editor in Flourish, which is what makes this, you know, all much easier to do in this type of using Flourish as a type of software. And then throughout, I will give you some kind of, we'll summarize what we've done in the examples, and I'll give you some tips and tricks that hopefully will resonate with you and stick with you, and you can think about these things when you're designing your own charts and visuals. So that is the agenda. So I just wanted to set a bit of context to this, why storytelling is important, before we jump into the skills that you need and the framework that helps build those skills and the examples. So this is just a bit of a scene setter. So I knit this infographic just to show, to just give a sense of how much data is being created in the world from kind of the beginning of the internet era. So, I mean, people talk about petabytes and zettabytes, and it's just huge amounts of data. It's very hard to kind of get this concept in your head. So this is kind of a quick summary to put this in context. So 1 petabyte is 20 million 4 drawer-filled cabinets filled with text. 20 million is just 1 petabyte. Or it's 13 years of HD TV video. That's 1 petabyte. So if we look at how the amount of data being created in petabytes has changed over time, and have a look at this in a chart, this is 1 petabyte. So this is the kind of 20 million 4-drawer filing cabinets here. So in 2010, we were creating 1 zettabyte of data. So this is how much bigger this is than a petabyte. And since 2010, this is how data has been growing. So we're at about 26 zettabytes of data in the world created. And this is how it's forecast to grow in the future. So in the next 3 to 4 years, it's going to double to 150 zettabytes of data. So this is just to give you an idea of the increasingly huge amounts of data that are being generated from our more digitalized lives. So this is setting the scene for why picking out important messages and bits of information from data and telling a story around them are the only real way to find meaning in this data madness, and let it resonate and have an impact on people and their decision making. And this is kind of the point of the session. We need to find effective ways to communicate all this kind of insight to people, and we found that visual methods of displaying information are resonate far more with human beings, and storytelling, so telling a story and taking people step by step through something really helps them to remember and engage with something. So these are kind of the skills that we're going to explore today. So as I said before, when you visualize something, it resonates with the human brain. We are very visually wired, and I just like to do this little example. So just in the word data visualization, how long would it take you to tell me how many A's there are in this word? So mentally kind of processing it, you'd have to read through, you go 1, 2, 3, 4. It's slow, and you've got to read through every character to see. But as soon as you put some kind of visual element on top of it, like a color, it makes it far quicker for you to recognize that there's 4 A's in there. You can see that the 2 A's in data are much closer together in the word, and the 2 A's in visualization are much further away in the word. So even just this small thing of adding color to text has instantly resonated in your brain and given you more insight more quickly than if it's just all black. So it's just something to kind of think about when you're thinking about color and visualizing and marks and lines on your charts. These are all the things that you're helping your reader to quickly process the information that you're trying to give them. And just again, a couple of other things just to set the scene. So data visualization is a powerful analytical tool. So lots of people use it for visual analytics, and we have seen this in the advent of lots of BI tools like Tableau and Power BI, very visual analytics tools. So it's good for visual analytics and analyzing your data, but it's also a very good and powerful communication tool, because it's based all on the same premise that when you visualize something, when a human visualizes something, they see things that they didn't see before. And one example that I like to show is this little, it's very kind of cool, but Anscombe was a statistician, and he wanted to prove to other statisticians that numbers weren't exact, and graphing was kind of seen as, you know, charting something was seen as being a bit wishy-washy. And he wanted to show that actually visualizing and charting your data is just as important as the kind of statistical analysis of it. And he came up with a data set of four data sets of coordinates that had absolutely identical regression analysis. So it had the same R and T values and so on. And he wanted to prove that if you just looked at the statistical analysis of it, these data sets would appear very similar. But when you chart them, the relationships in these data sets are very, very different. And so if you see this kind of data set, you might make a very different decision where there's a kind of linear relationship than you would with this kind of data set where there's no real relationship as such, but just an outlier and one outlier. So this is just to show you that looking at your data in a visual way helps you see patterns and understand it in a way that you might not do if you just looked at the numbers or statistical parts of it alone. So that's kind of the analytical part of it. But also on the communication part of visualization, as I've said, humans are naturally wired to process information visually. So 90% of information transmitted to our brain is visual, and we process visual information between 60,000 and 600,000 times faster than text. And I love this little infographic because it just proves that, you know, it would take you much longer to read through this text and process what it's trying to tell you. But instantly you see this sign and you know that danger, beware, there's falling rocks. So it's just a nice little way of showing you that you find the message much easier to recognize in this kind of visual representation. And lastly, humans find it much easier to recall things that they've seen. So we will retain about 80% of what we see, but only 20% of what we read and 10% of what we hear. So making things embed in people's minds and let them recall it quicker happens much more if you present information to them in a visual way instead of just lots and lots of text. So that's kind of just a summary of why visualization has kind of taken hold a bit in the data analytics and communication world, because of all these very powerful reasons as to why it helps people understand information. So on to the next part. What skills do you need to be good at data storytelling? So as I alluded to before, people need to be very good with numbers and data. So even I find some of the best analysts in the world don't always think about the metrics that they are presenting and how that helps a person understand the relationship that they're trying to explain. So even though you're good at numbers, it's being mindful of these other skill sets that you need, which are good communication. Is the metric that you're using to explain the relationship helpful to explaining to someone that doesn't understand the data in the way that you do? Is it making it simple and easy for them to understand? So this is a whole nother set of skills. And as I explained in my kind of background, what I found over my career is that very few people are good at both of these things. You have very numerate, very analytical people, and you have people that are very good at communication. And so being good at both of these things is, you know, it's quite hard to find, but it is easier to get better at one or the other, and hopefully this kind of stepping through this framework will help with that. And lastly, the design elements of it. So this is very the creative aspect of visualizing data and creating visual content. And again, very few people are good at all of these things, and so it's kind of for your own self, it's very helpful and will do you in good stead to raise the bar in all three areas of this skill. But nearly always is also good to work in multi-skilled teams with people coming at it from very different angles and having these different skill sets. Nearly always you will come out with a better output from combining the skill set of people that have these three sets of skills. So that's kind of my intro, kind of scene setting, and then we're kind of going to get into the nitty-gritty now. So how do you become a good storyteller? How do you improve those three skill sets that I've spoken about? And this is a framework I have developed to help people kind of step through all the decisions around their numbers, their communication, and their design to produce great visuals and stories in this kind of in the data world. This is my very simple framework. It's simple for a reason, so that people can remember it. And throughout my career, nearly always, I would come back to these kind of 5 main things that I would think about when designing a visual or a data story. And so I've kind of honed it over my own experience. So the first most important thing is you must, before you start making any kind of chart or visual content, find the story you want to tell. And I know this seems so obvious, but people very rarely do this. They mix up their analysis with trying to tell their story. And actually what you really want to do is do all your analysis, do all your kind of exploration of your data, and then pick out the story that you want to tell from that. Do all that hard work first, and then find your key messages that these are the things that you want to communicate to someone. I find this doesn't happen very often, or what happens is people do their analysis and then they think they have their messages, or they have a preconceived idea about what they want to say. And then when they start to put their visuals together, it doesn't back up that story. And so they end up changing their story based on visualizing their information, which is why I kind of hark back to visual kind of analytics, and visual exploration of data is also part of the analytical process as well, and should be built into that part of the process as well. And that is in the kind of finding your story analytical part of looking at data. This session is focused on the communication part of it. We could do many sessions on visual analytics, but this really is key, because what happens is, if you don't really understand the story you're trying to tell, you'll make a visual that doesn't speak to that story, or you'll end up just going back to starting it from scratch because you got through the whole process and realized that wasn't really the story you wanted to tell. And then all the decisions that you made on these other things aren't the right decisions. So I'm going to hammer this home all the way through, but this really is the first thing you need to do. Secondly, you need to think about the right chart type that you want to use to present the pattern or the relationship that is describing your story. And nearly a vast majority of the time, the most basic chart types, line, bar charts, bar charts, area charts, the ones that we see mostly in our everyday lives are the best type of chart to use, and that's why they're used a lot. But it's really surprising how many times I see people use a bar chart when they should be using a line chart. Even just mixing up the basic chart types can happen a lot. So, and even with a basic chart, these other decisions that I'm going to go through on metrics and numbers and color and labeling make a huge difference as to how big an impact your chart has and how good it is as telling the story. So then once you kind of, these things it's not like a step through thing, it's something that you kind of check holistically in one, but obviously have to go through them in some kind of order. But also making sure your data is clean and structured in the right way for the chart type that you've chosen is really important, because you will need different types of data structure or formatting to be able to draw out different parts of your story, and also making sure you use the right metrics in your story. So I will when we go through the examples, these things will become more clear. I'll show you what I mean about using the wrong metrics, but it's just things like, do you use a percentage change or a level or a difference from average? All these things are things that really need to be thought through, and not kind of just, I've always used that, so I'll just use a percentage change because that's what I've always used. You need to choose the metric that speaks to your story, the one that makes it most clear. The fourth thing is color. Again, this is, sorry, I've clicked off it. Color is a huge decision. We can go through lots of examples. There's lots of consideration at the moment about accessibility and accessible colors, because particularly in the public sector, it's become law now in the UK that all websites have to be AA rated for accessibility, which means you have to have enough contrast between the colors that you're using and the background so that people with impaired sight can see things properly. But there's also a whole range of other color decisions that need to be made. And normally you want to use color to pick out points in your story, and less color to fade away less important information. We also have, color can get a bit hard with people's branding and the color palettes that they have within their branding, and that can make it quite difficult. And I have noticed that lots of organizations have started to expand their color range for their data visuals because their branded colors don't give them enough array to play with or enough accessible colors. So this is a big area. And lastly, labeling and annotation and text. So text is very important. Using text on your charts is very important. Your titles are very important, and people tend to. I've noticed kind of old-fashioned charts always have loads of footnotes and text off the chart. We very rarely put annotation on our chart, which seems strange because it can be very helpful for the reader. So again, in the examples, I will take you through how text and labeling can really help with telling your story. So this is the framework. You're going to see this a lot, these 5 little colored bars. So examples. Now we are going to put the framework into practice. This is also maybe a little bit interactive. So I've picked some examples out from my time as a data viser, and I've picked up some bad examples, and then I am going to step you through my framework as to how would you change this chart to make it easier to understand, to make it tell a story rather than be something that looks very kind of corporate and remote and analytical and not inclusive at all. And obviously I have to start with a chart from the Bank of England, but this is my bad example. This is an example of a bad chart by the Bank of England. The first thing I'm going to do is always think about this story that you want to tell, because until you know that, you don't really know how to design the chart to speak to that story. And so my first tip is always best to summarize your story in a simple, short title. And then once you have that, you always have that to refer back to when you're making all the other decisions. So here, the story is the value of the pound has fallen, particularly since the EU referendum. Again, the bank has moved much more away from this. Sterling has depreciated further since August. It's very technical, it's very formal language. It wasn't really since August, it was from they were, the trigger was the EU referendum. So just being very clear, to the point, in plain English, what is the take-home message from this chart? And so this is speaking to that. Think about it, write it down, and have it there ready for all the next set of decisions. So this is what we want to design to this point. So the value of the pound has fallen, particularly since the EU referendum. Our next question is this the right chart type? It's pretty standard. It's time series. We're trying to show something over time, and so we're pretty sure that we've got the right chart type in a line chart. Just a little tip with the FT, the Financial Times, have a visual vocabulary, which is a really good resource for deciding what chart type you should choose for what type of relationship or data type you have. So there's the link here, so you can have a look at that. It's really, really helpful. But yeah, this one, we're pretty sure it's going to be a line chart. What next? So again, Nika, you alluded to these numerical choices. So here I have actually decided that if we just go back to the chart before, this kind of metric is incomprehensible to me. I don't really get it. I don't know why they've used an index to the 2nd of January 2014, because this date has absolutely no bearing on my story or anything to do with what I'm trying to say. And so, why has this metric been chosen? Ultimately, the reason at the bank is because this is when this chart got made about here, and they just never bothered to change the metric or think about it. So now we're thinking, actually, what makes this easier for my reader to understand? And for me, people are much more familiar when we're talking about exchange rates, about currency per pound. How many euros do I get for my pound? How many dollars do I get for my pound? And so we've moved away from this index and we've moved towards the actual exchange rate, pounds per euro and dollar. So that's a change in my metric. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying think about these numerical decisions. Secondly, again, as you said, Nika, think about where you want to start your axis. So before we had this big gap from 0 to 1 because the data hadn't gone into that, and it was compressing the pattern into a smaller area. So now we've decided we're going to start it at 1. This is 1 for 1. So at 1, you can get £1 for $1 or €1. And to be fair, we could annotate that on there as well, and that would be more helpful to a reader. And this makes this pattern more noticeable here. And then the issue we have is actually people are looking here at this huge white space. This is where I look. My attention is on here because we have given such a long back run of data. And so maybe actually we want to think about the x-axis as well and where we start the x-axis. So now we're cutting off all those years that aren't really very meaningful for context, because we're not trying to compare this moment in time to anything previously. We want people to focus on this big fall, and this helps focus them more on this fall. So that's kind of all these numerical decisions, helping people focus the eye on where you want them, where you want them to look. So another thing I introduced, because we're talking about colours, and that's our kind of next decision in the process, is what I call chart infrastructure, and I'm just introducing it now because it's our first example. But all these decisions about how to set your chart up are very specific design decisions. And so here, in the bank's printed publications, they have very thick black grid lines. And grid lines are really helpful. They help give a reference for a change. But when they're so kind of bold and dominant, they are taking the reader's attention away from the story. And so they should be there for reference, but maybe not have such an impact. So at my time at the bank, part of our kind of chart design process was to think about these decisions on how we want to set up our charts and our chart infrastructure. And we decided to go for something very, very simplistic. So we even started to take away our axis rulers, so we had more white space. We made things grayer and lighter, so they were less dominant. And this is actually one of the benefits and why we moved to using something like Flourish, because we can set up all these consistent themes in Flourish, and everyone's charts look like this now. It's not like they've got Excel and they've decided to have a line here and not here. So just thinking about those like real basic decisions around axis rulers and tick marks and grid line colors, there's a lot of thought that goes into all of this, and making your chart feel nice, look modern, and not have too much stuff competing for attention. So I just raised that here because this was a design decisions that the bank went through. And grey is your friend. Grey is the new black. Using lighter shades of grey for peripheral information on the chart is very helpful because it's there, but it doesn't dominate. So yes, grey should be your friend. Then the next kind of colour choices, and again, things that you can think about in your colour palette, is you should be using contrasting, accessible colours, so people can easily see the difference between them. They're contrasting, and you're choosing a bold colour for the thing that you want to stand out. So here we chose bold because we wanted to put a bit more emphasis on the euro, but in later examples you'll see where colour really makes kind of a big impact. And also the bank decided to make its lines slightly thicker, so even the weight of your lines on your line chart is a design decision that should be thought about. So that's our kind of colour decisions. Now if we move towards labelling. So again, kind of on my advice and our thinking about what we were going to do with our basic chart infrastructure, I would avoid legends and move away from using legends, because people have to look up here or over here or down here to understand what series is being plotted. And it's just much easier to label directly on the chart next to the series. It's much easier for someone to understand what series is what, and in the same colour as the series. So lots of people do this in black, and it's fine in this instance where it's very obvious which one is which. But when lines are closer together or crisscross, it's much harder to see, you know, if it's not coloured in the same colour as the series. So for me, wherever possible, we would try and remove a legend. It gives you more space, and it's easier for a reader to instantly recognise what is being plotted. And then some more labelling, so using annotation to reinforce important points in your story. So this is the point of the story, the EU referendum, and this is what we want them to take on board. So just by putting in this simple reference line, you've drawn attention here. And again, you know, as the story, when this first came out, I think we were doing this chart about here, you know, the story might materialize and change over time, and you can put different reference points on to draw people's attention to those different things. But bringing in this annotation helps, and to mark events or the things that you want to draw attention to, really helps people take them through the story. This is what happened here, and this is where I want to look. This is what happened here, and this is where I want you to look. So annotation can be very helpful for a reader. So that's our first example. So just to kind of round up some top tips, grey is the new black. You should definitely use it for peripheral or secondary information and things that you don't want to draw too much attention to, but you still want it there for information like grid lines, axis labels, and so on. Use bold, contrasting and accessible colours to draw attention to main things in your story. Always label it in the same colour as your series, and use annotation. Again, don't write all over your chart, but simple, short, concise annotation to help focus people on specific areas or points in your story. Yeah, just to go through this kind of the kind of 5 steps again in the framework that we have just applied to this particular example. The story, the main thing we did was think of the title, make this sum up your story, and put this down first so that you always make the decisions on the other things based on this story. Chart type, we chose the line chart because we want to show change over time. Numerical decisions, we change both the X and the Y axes to start from different points, and we changed the metric that was being plotted so that people could have a better understanding of the meaning of the thing that we were plotting. Colour, we chose 2 strong, contrasting, accessible colours, and we used the kind of more muted grey for peripheral information. And at the back of our mind, we also have to have accessibility considerations about whether people can read things in certain colours if they're too light. And labelling, we labelled each series directly on the line. We decided no more legends, and we coloured it the same as the series, and we added reference lines and annotation to reiterate messages and important events along the way. And all these things are going towards helping step a reader through that chart and it being much simpler and easier for them to understand what you're trying to say to them. My second example is again another line chart, and it's about Bitcoin. And so this was another bank example, and this was the exact example: the daily price of Bitcoin and a barrel of crude oil. So I mean, if anyone has any suggestions, let me know about what you would do to this chart. If not, I will tell you what I did to this chart, which isn't necessarily the best thing, but this is how I stepped through my framework to change it. So in the interest of time, I will just go through what I did. Firstly, you're going to get bored of hearing me say this. We need to identify the story you want to tell. And so this is where this kind of title is really important. So lots of people do just use a title to describe the data that they are plotting, and that is not very helpful for a reader. So I would always encourage people to use a descriptive title as their main title, and then in the subtitle say the data that is showing. In this particular case, the actual story was that the price of Bitcoin was very volatile, even compared to oil, one of the most volatile assets, price assets in the world. And the context of this story at the time was for a guide for the public on cryptocurrencies. And we wanted them to understand, it was at a time when the price of Bitcoin was going up massively, and we wanted people to understand that it's a very volatile asset and it's not necessarily the price will always go up. And so this is why this chart is bad, because what I take from this is that the price just goes up massively. And kind of the message that is that the price of I mean, you can see it's a bit volatile, but it's not the overarching message that's coming to me. And also this comparing to crude oil. Well, because the price of a barrel of crude oil is just so low compared to the change in Bitcoin, and this is just no real comparator at all. So this is why this chart just didn't tell the right story and wasn't designed in, badly. So these are the things I did to it to change the way it was presented. So again, it's a line chart, it's time series. We feel like that's, innately a good chart type to use. But maybe this is the metric decisions are wrong. We don't really care about the price of Bitcoin. We care about how it's changing. And so instead of using the actual price, we move to a metric of the percentage change from the previous day. So this is daily price changes. So it's, volatile anyway. And now you can see this volatility much more clearly, and it's having more of an impact on the reader. It's really resonating with you, all these big swings. So plotting a different type of metric really has a huge impact on this. Secondly, having all the series plotted on one chart looks very busy, and so if we split it out into a grid of charts, it makes it I think it makes it much easier to see how much more volatile Bitcoin is compared to oil or the sterling exchange rate. We put another comparator in here because at the time the pound had fallen a lot because of the EU referendum. And so splitting it out helps people see, wow, this is going up and down. And annotating a few points on there to highlight how volatile this is. So telling people, Bitcoin went up by 65% in one day and then down by 25% in another day. How does this relate to oil prices, which are very, very volatile? We say oil prices are one of the most volatile assets in the world. Oil prices are only changing by a maximum of 10% in a day. And, this big event that happened where in the UK, the pound fell a lot because of the EU referendum, this huge event only actually caused the pound to fall by 7%. So adding these other things for context really helps reiterate your message and kind of reinforce it in their minds. So this is where kind of labeling, annotation can really help you tell your story. So yes, just a quick summary. I mean, you can look through these after, but again, just always summarize your story in a short, sharp title so you know what you're designing to. Chart type, we used a line chart, but we decided to split them out this time into a grid of charts so we could make it easier to see the patterns for each series. We changed our metric to percentage daily changes rather than the price, because it made it much more kind of obvious that Bitcoin was volatile. One thing I forgot to mention, which you could change, but I didn't, we kept the same x-axis across the whole scale, the whole grid of charts, because we wanted them to read from the same magnitude. But you can change the x-axis on your grid of charts if it's more the pattern that you wanted to show rather than comparing them. Again, another design decision that you would take based on the story you want to tell. Color, we used 3 kind of distinct accessible colors. We put Bitcoin in the kind of brighter color to attract attention there too. And labeling, we labeled key data points to emphasize our message and to kind of reiterate our story with the actual numbers. So these are all the things that we did there. So, oh, sorry, bad chart. bad chart. I've already revealed the secret. So again, this looks like a nice chart, but it's not really that nice. It has nice colors on it. But what is it telling us? What do we want the reader to take away? What's the story in this chart? It's just got interest rates by country. Okay, we can all see this big, this big fall here. So is that what you want me to notice? Or do you want me to notice that the United States has gone up a lot here? Who knows? So again, I'm going to keep banging on about this. Descriptive title that summarizes your story to begin with, so that you hang off this title with all the following and subsequent decisions. So here in this particular, and this doesn't necessarily have to be, it could be a completely different story from this chart, but in this particular chart, our story is interest rates have fallen over the last few decades and have even gone negative in some countries. So this is kind of part of the story, because this was a big event that happened to make them fall. But really, we're also thinking about the negative part of this. So again, having that descriptive title really helps introduce the main message of the chart. And then we start making decisions based on this. So chart type. Again, it's a line chart. It's time series. We feel like this is a good way of showing changes over time. There's lots of lines, which makes it a bit more complicated. Do you really want all these lines on one chart? Because the chart is in Flourish and it's interactive, it's not static, it makes it easier for a reader. If they don't really know which country's which, they can just hover over it, which is helpful. And again, because it's in Flourish, you can put more information in the pop-up if you want. So here, if people hover over it, they see that the event that happened there, that caused a financial crisis was Lehman collapsing. So there are things in interactive charts that you can do to help with having a lot of information. Again, in interactive charts, you can switch things off. So if you, my screen has frozen. Let's go here. So you can plot the different areas, so that helps people just see the country that they want to. So again, interactivity and filtering helps people explore this for themselves. But there are loads of other better things that we could do to make this easier for someone to understand. So if we step through our framework, the first thing we could do is do labeling, get rid of that legend. It gets rid of the space up here. It's much easier for people to see what series is what with a label at the end. And this is now a Flourish feature, so you can just switch this on. It's quite easy. So yes, we thought about our labeling. Add a reference line, like I said before, annotation. This was the trigger for interest rates falling across these kind of Western countries, the financial crisis. Tell people that, label that event. Colouring. So this is less on the colouring of the lines. I've just noticed all the lines have changed colour. But anyway, this is about using colour to highlight something that's happened on the actual axis. So we are shading this area to draw people's attention to the fact that this is where it's gone negative. This is where interest rates have gone negative. And we've also just reinforced the kind of zero line, so people can now see that something is happening here. And we're drawing attention to that with the colour. But it's still hard to see which, to kind of mentally compute which country interest rates have gone negative and which hasn't. So then again, this kind of idea of using a grid of charts makes it kind of nicer. You're comparing everything on the same scale, but you can start to see the UK came from a higher level, it's gone down a lot, US has gone up. And then these are the countries where their rates are going negative. So splitting it out into a grid of charts really helps. But also I've changed this to an area chart. So this is where even just small little changes in chart type can have kind of a big impact. So by having it as an area chart, you can color in the bit that's gone negative, and then that really kind of gives people reference of how negative. Look, Denmark's gone negative a lot, Switzerland's gone negative a lot. So this kind of use of color through the area chart is really helping people to focus on how negative these countries have gone, which it's just a click of a button in Flourish, switching between the line and the area chart. So you can test these things out by fiddling around with them. It's not like you have to redraw the whole thing again. And then lastly, color, again, more color decisions. So I liked it. So even though this looks beautiful, and I like to call it kind of a unicorn puke effect. It looks beautiful, but is it really helpful? No. Colors should mean something. And so we don't really need all those colors. And here we can use color to mean these are the countries that interest rates haven't gone negative, and these are the countries where interest rates have gone negative. And that again reinforces this main message that you're separating out these two groups, but you can see that everyone's interest rates have gone down since the financial crisis, except maybe less so in Japan. So these are kind of all these little decisions, they're all small, but they add up to make something completely different. This chart looks completely different to the first chart, and hopefully much more kind of intuitive and easier to understand the story than the first chart. It's much kind of can compute what you're trying to take away from it much more quickly. So what do we do? So to turn this into a killer chart, we just again, these are five things that we go through. Our descriptive title, we formulated this first. We knew exactly what we were trying to explain to the person looking at it. We chose a chart type. So this also shows you the kind of iterative process of design. So originally, it's a change over time. It's pretty obvious. We want to use a time series. It's not always the case, but nearly always is. But actually, as we started looking at it, we realized there was other things that we could do by splitting it out into small multiples, by actually changing it to an area chart. And this kind of shows you that all these decisions are a process, and it can take a lot of playing around with and a lot of kind of trying things out to see which really is the best way of presenting the information. And actually, originally, when I put this chart together, it was not an area chart, and I just kind of stumbled across, I just switched it over and thought, oh God, that actually looks much better. But the original chart did not go out as an area chart. So things can iterate over time, and you can find different kind of solutions and change things as you go along. It's not necessarily that the first thing you come up with is the best thing. So it can definitely be a process. Metrics, I didn't really talk about metrics, but we did kind of order the countries from the kind of ones that are still positive interest rates, and the highest started off with the highest interest rates, and just little things. I didn't point this out in the actual chart, but we put a percent, so I will just show you that, because people don't do that, and it's really is helpful to put the actual kind of symbol in the chart. So a percentage symbol here, or if it's pounds or billions, that having it actually next to the number is very helpful for a reader. And some people tend to leave that off, maybe just because they haven't thought about it. That's what I mean by adding the percentage. So yeah, maybe less numerical decisions in that one. Color, again, we had all these lovely, beautiful colors, but it didn't really mean anything. And so we decided just to go to the most simplest, purest form, which is just to have two colors, which actually means something. The countries that rates aren't negative and the countries that rates are negative. And some tips here: try not to use too many colors if you don't need to. So I know that people love colorful stuff, but it can be distracting and misleading if it doesn't mean anything. And sometimes, simplicity is best. So that's something to be mindful of. And then we used the country subtitles to name each of them. We added reference lines for the financial crisis. So all these kind of labeling directly on the chart and not in legends and the like. Okay, we've got one last line chart and then we will move on to some different stuff. I apologize so many line charts, but hopefully you can see how many things you can do even just around the humbled line chart to make it easier to understand and to tell a story. So again, house prices across the UK, another one of those charts with lots of lines on. And what is it really that we want people to take from this chart? As always, we start with our story. What is the story? Not a description of the data. So the story we want from this chart is how house prices have increased over time, but this varies across regions. So it's a two-part message. So we see this is the change, this kind of increase over time, but then how much more somewhere like London's house prices have gone up compared to somewhere like the Northeast. So again, we'll step through this example within our framework and see how we might change this just to make it a bit more understandable and for it to tell a story. So house, so we put our title in here. Again, we have all the same things as we did before. We can use, so this does, I think, have a filtering legend. No, maybe I haven't switched it on. We have all the same interactivity, and we have, lots of lines, but is it really speaking to what we're trying to say? Oh, now it's, sorry, this is my internet now being very slow and clicking through what I've just clicked. So first of all, we're going to have a think about our labels and do the same as what we did before. So getting rid of our legends, putting our labels directly on the chart in the same color as the series. Again, with the example before, putting a filter in so that people can select different areas to compare, because there is a lot of lines on this chart. Again, all these things are really helpful in Flourish to give people a bit more control, the reader control over what they want to see. But I feel like my internet has now gone very slow. Maybe we shouldn't have had a break. There. So again, these questions about colouring, do they mean anything, all those colours? No, they don't. They're quite distracting. So do we pare down our colour choices and bring out the things that we want to focus on in a bright colour and fade out the less important things that are just there for context? So this is slightly different, where we're fading out actual data series because we don't want to draw attention to them, but we still want them to be there so that people can have some kind of context about the spread of house price changes across the different areas of the UK. And here you can see when you colour something red, your attention focuses on this, and then the grey is kind of more peripheral and in the background. So that's just a few design decisions on charts that have lots of series plotted in it. But actually, what is the main story? The main story here is that we want to show people how prices have changed a lot since 2009, which happened to be the financial crisis. And this kind of, all this, what's going on in between is less important to us. It's kind of wiggling around a little bit. But really, we just want to compare to 2009. So maybe this is a chance to start thinking about some of the slightly different chart types. And maybe here, this, a line chart is not the right one, or there's something else that we can choose to help us see this. So this is a different chart type. It's called the slope chart, and we have a slope chart template in Flourish. And here it's getting rid of all the noise in between, and it's just plotting the difference between 2009 and 2020. And now we can see a kind of smoother kind of trend, and we can really see London is accelerating much quicker than the other areas. And we might want to change this to a different metric. So this is looking at the percentage change rather than the actual house price level. And so switching between the metrics might tell us something else. And here we can see that, again, London's gone up a lot, but because it's from a higher base, the percentage change is actually higher on average as well. So just swapping between these different metrics might tell a slightly different story. So again, thinking about what thing you know, the main point that you want to bring out. So that was just a very quick example. I probably should have just done that before the break, but just to show you that line charts, time series charts are nearly, you know, very, very common and are used a lot, but it's not necessarily the only thing you can use to show a change over time. And if there is something that you want to show the difference between 2 points and the things in between are less, you know, you don't want to draw attention to it, it's definitely a different option. So again, going through our kind of process of our story, our descriptive title, we put that up first to hone in on the message that we want to tell. We, in this case, decided actually maybe a slope chart was better because it gave us the difference between 2 points in time. With the slope chart and Flourish, you can nicely toggle between absolute change and percentage change. So you give the user, you can give the user the option, but you could also make that choice yourself about what metrics to show. We use color to draw out the kind of outliers and the average. And we could do different colors for all of them if we really wanted to. And we labeled all the series directly on the chart, and we had no legend. So just a quick one for the end of line charts, just to kind of summarize all those same sorts of things that we're always thinking about and doing, but then in this instance using a slightly different chart type. So I'm not going to do 4 examples of bar charts, so it will kind of, we'll pick up the pace now, getting through a lot of different chart types. But the bar chart example I've decided to use is it's showing the average number of furloughed hours in the UK across all our regions from coronavirus. So chart type. Bar charts are good for categorical data and comparing magnitudes, so the size of the bars or the heights of the bars. And so because we've got categorical data here, we've got regions, and we want to compare a kind of the magnitude of furloughed hours by region, it's the perfect choice. Also, just to kind of explain the difference between, we call this a bar chart where the bars go across. Most people are very used to column charts where the bars go upwards, and both options, you can toggle between both options in Flourish. I tend to like bar charts more than column charts because this kind of vertical orientation I find is much more helpful to read labels. So you read labels downwards. When you have longer labels, it's much easier to fit them in at the side rather than squeeze them into the bar area at the bottom. And also nearly always this bar chart is better than a column chart on mobile phone because it goes downwards rather than across, and so it doesn't get so squashed up on small screens. So this, you know, although it's not as common as a column chart, for me, I prefer to use bar charts. So that's why I've gone for this chart type for this. So numerical considerations, you will be amazed how many people don't sort their bars. They just put it in alphabetical order. The Bank of England used to be very bad for this. So if it had, say, a list of banks here, it would just put them in alphabetical order, and then you could see no pattern. And so just simple sorting is just very effective, and you should definitely do that, because the sorting is the story. This is how you're telling people London has the lowest number of average furlough hours and East Midlands has the highest. If you don't sort it, people can't see that and they have to look through it for themselves, which is, you know, not what you, it's time consuming, and you're making it a lot of effort for them to understand your data, your story. So this isn't, so we've got labels as our kind of categorical titles, but adding kind of labels, fresh reference lines, things that enhance your story or give context to your story can be really, really helpful. So, so here we've marked out 200 hours. What does 200 furlough hours really mean? You know, how do we making this meaningful to someone? How do we put it in context of how many hours you normally work? And so here we just put this in as a nice way of framing the numbers and giving it context. So this is equivalent to 6 weeks of full-time work. And so, you know, all regions across the UK are having 200 hours on average of furloughed worker time. So that's just an example of where something like that can really help put things in context. So this title that we were speaking to, the average number of furlough hours, is similar across region. But actually, the original story for this chart was that the number of hours differed a lot across regions, so the complete opposite side of the story. And that was the story that the person wanted to tell. Well, it doesn't really look like it differs that much. And this is where it can be quite interesting between the story you want to tell and how you represent information to tell that story. So are you being a bit disingenuous? Are you comparing the right things? Are you drawing attention to the wrong thing? So it can be quite interesting how you frame your story, and how you kind of display information can be a bit kind of I don't know, highlighting the wrong things or telling people something that's not really a truth. So it's always good to be aware of that, or, you know, are you misleading someone, or is it in the right context? So when you start to design things and you find that the chart that you're doing or the visual you're doing isn't backing up your story, it's a good point to pause and think, is this really my story? Is this really the correct story? And you should either change your story, and this is where your kind of analytics can get mixed up. You're kind of finding your story and you're telling your story can get mixed up, because sometimes when you haven't visually looked at your data, it's only when you come to communicate your data that you realize actually that's not true. So it can be a bit of a kind of cyclical thing that you get caught up in. So either you should think about changing your story because the data does not back it up, or if you really do believe that this is quite different across regions, you need to think about a different way of presenting the information. So in Flourish, we won't allow you to not plot a bar chart from a non-zero axis because it is disingenuous, and it means that it's not correct anymore. Comparing the magnitudes is not right because it's not going from zero, and so it's something that you're kind of blocked from doing in Flourish, which is a good thing. No one would advocate a non-zero axis for bar charts because it's not representative of the data. So what you might have to think about is how do you want to show this information in a different way? So here, instead of plotting the number of average hours, I've plotted the difference from the UK average. So you can see more. It's a different metric and it's a slightly different story. But you can see now more clearly that London on average has 8 hours less per furloughed worker, and the East Midlands has 6 hours more per furloughed worker. So this is a way of thinking about using a metric, another type of metric, a difference from average or a percentage change from something to tell or show a different story. So this is kind of just to show this point in real life. And again, we can use colour and simple design things to draw attention to things. So here, Nika mentioned earlier, we're using blue for kind of this feeling of this is cooler, this is less. London has a lower number of furloughed hours, and Midlands, these Midlands where we want to draw attention to, these have higher number of average furlough hours. So you can bring colour into bar charts as well, as line charts to kind of focus attention on them. So that was just a quick bar chart example. As we showed, your title the story in your chart can change, and how you design your chart will differ tremendously based on what you want to show. So we started with the average number of furlough hours is similar across regions, but then we can change it to the average number of furloughed hours is different across regions, depending on what you want to focus on and what message you want the person to take away. We wanted to show numbers for categorical data, and so that's why we chose the bar chart, and we wanted to compare magnitudes of those numbers. And we went for horizontal orientation rather than vertical column chart, because it's easier to read, it's helpful when labels are long, and it's better for mobile phone. We sorted the regions to make it easier to see the pattern, who is highest, who is lowest. And then in the second part of the example, we changed the metric to difference from average, because we wanted to put emphasis on a different message, which is the variance across regions, not the similarities across regions. And then lastly, we used, not lastly, but we used a bit of colour to draw attention to the extremes. This is just a kind of cherry on the cake. We didn't really have to use colour if we didn't want to. And then at the very beginning, we added reference lines and annotation to give context and to help tell a richer story and enable the reader to kind of put what we were saying to them in some kind of context. So that is what we did for the bar chart. Second example of bar charts is about stacked bar charts. This example, wait, sorry, I'm just going to have a sip. This is a stacked bar chart where you're wanting to compare magnitudes, but you're looking at it split down into different groups. So this is looking at the amount of people who own or rent their house over time. And this is the story that we want to tell in this example. More younger people are renting and older people buy. So we're designing to that message. And we want to see, we want to have kind of the property status splits across UK and how this has changed over time. And so at the moment, the metric we're plotting is the number of people. It's quite hard because population could be changing over time. It's quite hard to see how the relative shares of each group is changing, because they're all being taken from a different baseline because they're being stacked on top of each other. And what we tend to do, people tend to do, is we focus on the first segment because that is being anchored to 0, and we can see that that is changing. So we can see owner outright is increasing, but then we can't see the next few segments because this is starting, this kind of buying with a mortgage is starting higher than in this year. So we can't see how the second segment has changed over time. So it's not a great way of showing or telling the story. So now instead we decide, let's do it. Sorry, I should have put a % here after saying we should put your symbols on your axis. But this is now, instead of the actual number, it's doing the proportional split across each year. So now we can see more easily how the composition of that year is made up of the different groups. But it's still not quite getting there. It's still quite hard to see. I mean, you get a general sense that the green bars were higher, and here the kind of red and orange bars are lower. And that over time, these kind of green and these red and orange bars are increasing, and so more people are renting. But it's not quite perfect. And so then we can start to think about, is a stacked bar chart the right option, or do we want to break it down into a grid of charts again? And so now every category has a 0 baseline, so we can see how it's changed over time relative to itself. And this makes it kind of clearer to see that all privately rented households that privately rent has definitely gone up over time. Social rented sector is kind of stayed the same, and buying with a mortgage has gone down, and owner outright has increased. So it's much easier to see the patterns in the segment. So this is a much better way of showing this information. But actually what our story is that the amount of young people renting has increased. And so overall, we've been looking at the total, and we haven't been looking at the age splits. And our focus is on the amount of people, the young people are renting more, and older people are owning more. And so this is where Flourish and interactivity and using filters can really help people step people through the story in the granularity of the data, which you just can't do in a static chart, because you've got to pick, you either got to take snapshots of every age group, or you've got to pick total, and then the kind of message is washed out in the averaging of all people. So the story now becomes moving between the age groups, which is something that Flourish is very good at, because it animates between the different age groups. And you can see younger people, there's a lot younger people renting and less owning outright. And as you move up the, as you click one more time, as you move up the age group, the proportions tend to change. So you can see these are getting smaller, more people are buying with a mortgage in this age category. And then as you're getting older, much fewer people are renting, and many more people are owning outright. So this is moving you to another level. You are moving from kind of good design of static one-off images, which are also interactive in Flourish, but you're moving towards stepping people through a story and animating through and using those kind of animations to help them see what is changing. And this is kind of moving on to the next level of real kind of animated storytelling. And this is where we're going to kind of focus a bit more of our attention in the last kind of half an hour. So yes, descriptive title, you all know you've got to do your story first in the descriptive title. Chart type, use the stacked bar charts to begin with, but then we realized all the kind of issues with this, and we moved towards the grid of charts because it's got a same baseline for every segment, and we can made it much easier to see the changes for all the different groups. Numeric, so we changed to this percentage of total, this 100% split it down, but really that didn't work. And again, we moved to the grid of charts. Color, I didn't really focus very much on this, but we did use color. So the kind of rented, we put in the oranges and the reds, and the kind of owner occupier mortgage buyers in the kind of greens and blues. So we are giving a separation to those two categories. And we could have used, in fact, we could have just used orange and lighter orange, and blue and lighter blue. That probably would have been better than having 4 separate colors. I'll do that for next time. We use filtering. We use this kind of labels and filtering buttons to step through the different age groups and make it more of a richer story on how this changes for different groups of people. So on to kind of, this is the last section really, which is the kind of cool bit, the kind of animated storytelling. So we've really covered the basics, and whether you do it in Flourish, whether you do it in Excel, whether you do it in R or Tableau, doesn't really matter. There are many small decisions that can just make the most basic of static charts and visuals much easier to understand, tell a good story, and all those decisions back up those stories. So up until now, it doesn't really matter what software you're in. There are lots of things I find helpful about Flourish that help with best practice. So the kind of grid of charts, the being blocked from having a non-zero baseline from bar charts, and things that really help with you know, good practice. But ultimately, the kind of cool, real getting into the nitty gritty of storytelling is where Flourish really kind of has its has the edge and has a real benefit, which is what we're going to do, what we're going to look through now. So this stepping people through different slides and different snapshots of your information to tell a richer story by kind of animating through it. So this is some examples of animated storytelling. So I have actually just used I'm going to take you out now into our website to show you some examples. And this one is, I really, really recommend it. So it's a new series that we've started. It's called it's our master series. And we take really good examples that people have, in the field have put together and that we think are great, and show you how to make it in Flourish. And this is just one of them. So John Murdoch is a data journalist at the FT. He's quite famous in this world of data storytelling. And he did in the FT, he did an example about how does COVID compare to kind of, why is it different to a bad flu season in terms of the impact on people's health and who dies and so on. So we put this together in a Flourish story. I don't know how many people have kind of moved on to stories in Flourish, but if you want, and we have time at the end, I can just show you how you do this. And my whole presentation has been in a Flourish story. So it's like PowerPoint, and you drop different Flourish visuals in, and then you can animate between the different states. So it's very easy to use. But I just thought I'll show you some examples about how people use this kind of I call it passive because people don't have to do anything. They're just watching it like a video, but this kind of animated storytelling to step people through. So it can go on autoplay in a story. So this is how has COVID affected UK deaths? And we're plotting on different lines for average deaths in a year, in the years leading up to COVID. So you can see it's all kind of similar. It follows a basic seasonal pattern. But then in 2020, COVID comes in, and we can see a big hump. We're using the 5-year average as a comparison, and then we can see, look how much of a difference COVID has made to our death rate. So this is really, really simple, stepping through just some lines being plotted on a chart so people understand what this 5-year average is made up of. Then putting the main thing you want to draw attention to, this is what COVID has done to the deaths, and then shading in the difference. So this is the design decisions on color. So this is kind of very, very, it feels nice, it feels very sophisticated, but it's very simple, and it is engaging, and it steps people through a story or a message. Now you could just have a static chart that had this on it, and that would get you a long way there. But just the kind of stepping a reader through all the different stages just reinforces the message and helps them keep engaged because of the movement. So that's one example I wanted to show you for kind of animated storytelling. So then the next example I'm going to show you, and we're moving on to kind of the harder chart types now. Harder, this scatter. So I'm going to show you a scatter example. So scatter charts help show the relationship between two metrics. So we've got one metric plotted on the x-axis and another metric plotted on the y-axis. And in this example, we are trying to show the relationship between daily cases of coronavirus and GDP. And this is an example we actually put together for a customer. So we use the scatter chart, as I said, because we want to show the relationship between two metrics. And here we can see we've got a trend line here, and we can see that this is a positive relationship over time, that there's more cases of corona for richer countries. So yeah, that's the chart type we decided to show because we want to show a relationship over time. We can add annotation to reinforce this message. So, people that aren't very analytical may find scatter a bit harder to understand. And so we're trying to get them to understand, what does a trend line mean? What does a positive trend line mean? So we can reinforce this message with annotation. In scatter, there are lots of numerical decisions we can make. So here, to help tell our story. So here we've logged the axis because we had quite big outliers like Turkey that were kind of making our relationship not look so strong. And we had a lot of bunching down in the bottom left-hand corner where there's a lot of kind of less rich countries with less cases. So if I just go back, you'll see this. So there's loads of bunching of countries down here. And then this is Turkey, an outlier, which is causing, you know, a lot of white space up here. So that is one decision you could make. You log the axis, and this compresses the axis because a log scale makes the relationship kind of tighter. So the other alternative is you don't want to explain log scales to people because they get a bit like, oh God, what's a log? And so you just remove Turkey because it didn't really add anything to your story, and it doesn't really matter if it's there. So then Turkey's gone and you've got more space and it's more spread out. And then you can use, so we've gone back to a log scale because it kind of looks nicer, and that's what the customer wanted. But you can then use different attributes on this scatter chart to enhance your story. So now, instead of having the dots all one size, we've decided to use the size of the dots to represent the population of the country. And this helps show which countries have the most cases. So you can see India have had a lot of cases, China have had a lot of cases, and United States have a lot of cases. So you can bring in all these other kind of attributes to represent different types of value or different points in your story. You can color it differently. So to show something else in your pattern, show something else in your story. Here they wanted to draw attention to where schools were shut, partially opened or closed due to Corona. So we're coloring now green where schools are fully open at this point in time, orange where they're partially, and red where they're closed. So the story that we wanted to tell with this chart is that, is it true that richer countries were more likely to open their schools or keep their schools open even though they had more cases? So can you see this? Richer countries are higher up here. Have they got more green? There does seem to be more green here, but there's also green here. So is there anything else we can do to help see this? So now we're using this grid of charts option to split out by the categories. And now you can see more distinctively that richer countries with more cases have kept their schools open. And the poorer countries with more cases have kept their schools closed. And you can use an annotation to draw people's attention to that, as we've spoken about before. Oh, sorry, I should have introduced this before I clicked the animation. So you can draw attention to this with annotation. Now, further enriching this story is to say, but how has this changed over time? And we have a time slider here, and we've just been looking at the latest data for when we put this together. But actually, there is a story through time, and things have changed through time. So we can start to play this through time and pick out points where things changed. And this is where kind of fully animated storytelling really helps you step people through something that's quite hard to grasp, and lots is happening. And you can kind of step them through the different stages. So here we say, at the peak of the pandemic in April, schools were shut in most of the countries, and we can see schools being shut in April. But then cases fell over the summer and lots of schools reopened in the autumn term. Again, as cases rose over autumn, fewer schools closed, especially in richer countries. So we can see a change in the pattern. We can see that richer countries are no longer closing their schools because of COVID cases. And then just another dimension. We can use another filter here to focus on different areas. So here, this is for Europe, and we can see all the European countries are above the trend lines. We've got on average more cases, and a lot of us are keeping our schools open. So this is, if you were using a dashboarding tool like Tableau, you would have it all there for people to explore for themselves, but you wouldn't be stepping them through the story, and so they could take it in, passively take it in. You can help them by stepping through it in a passive way that plays through to them, but they can also jump in if they want to and explore the data for themselves. And the animation between the states really helps people see what is changing. So these are all helpful kind of visual tricks, animation, to help people understand your story. So yes, so just to canter through this. So again, this is a much more complex story than what we have been thinking about before. There's lots of layers to it, but we're summarizing it still in kind of one simple descriptive title, which is richer countries have more COVID cases and are more likely to keep their schools fully open. And because it's such a complex story, this really lends itself to breaking it down into parts and stepping it through in this kind of animated storytelling way. Chart type, scatter. Again, because we had 2 metrics and we wanted to show the relationship between 2 metrics, but we also have 3 kind of distinct categories for the schools closing, opening, or being partially open. Metrics, I mean, so many decisions we could make. Do we have a log scale? Who do we exclude? Do we exclude any countries that are causing, the outlier is causing a problem with the kind of optics of it and the space of it? But this is just to give you a sense of how many little decisions there are in something that can look seemingly easy, but isn't. And then, as you saw, we use color to represent different categories. And we again, Nika, what you were saying, we attach like a kind of this red, danger, schools are closed, orange, you know, partially open, green, light, schools are open. That kind of, do people think about color associating to certain states, like bad states or good states? And labels, we used annotation on certain story points to draw attention to it. We used a trend line to help people understand this positive relationship. All these sorts of things to help your reader that may not be as analytical or as understanding of data, help them understand what you're trying to tell them. All just helps bring them into your story and your message. Okay, I'm going to hurry up. So 2 last examples. Again, it's animated storytelling, but with you know, a slightly harder chart type, which is our hierarchy templates. And this is understanding the types of family in poverty. So the first example, I call this a donut chart. It's basically a pie chart with the middle bit out of it. And it's actually the same as our sunburst chart, but it's just one ring. So it's basically could be both things. And this is showing a part to whole relationship. So the whole thing is everyone in the UK, and we're trying to show a kind of split, who's in poverty and who's not. I find it quite powerful just having the two categories, and you can see that nearly a quarter of people in the UK are classed as being in poverty. That's quite a powerful message. That's quite a big block of orange there. And so, you know, that's a statement to kind of begin with. But then we can start to build the story out with different layers. We can give more information and more detail. So now we can start to see, of those people in poverty, what an extra layer of information, who is working and who is workless, who doesn't have a job. And we can see that over half the families in poverty are actually working, which may, you know, is quite another interesting step in your story. Maybe people wouldn't naturally know that. And you can start to build out your story with more and more layers, so more and more breakdowns to tell more and more detailed kind of informational parts of your story. So now you're adding another layer, which is in those families, is there children or no children? And you can, here you can see a lot of these working families in poverty have children, and a lot of the workless people in poverty don't have children. So you're just giving more and more layered information to your story, and you're stepping people through that so that they can start to take home different messages. And then just again, it may be starting to get too confusing, or there's too many layers, but just to show you can layer and layer and layer information. So then you can start to see, are they couples, are they lone parents who are working, and so there's kind of no end, but it's to the detail that you can provide, but then there is in terms of people's kind of understanding, and if it's something that they need to know, but just to show you can keep building this out and out and out. Again, color choice is very important here. The orange, it draws attention to the poverty bit. It's quite striking. And the labeling obviously help tell the story. And you can use filtering as well, so you can give people different snapshots. So now if you just want to look at those in poverty, this becomes the whole population, and you can see how it's split down for just those in poverty, rather than keep going through that quarter of people in poverty segments. And now you can see that half of the people in working, the majority have children. So working, children, and in a couple. And this is the kind of hierarchy template. So it's quite handy. You can drill up and down into the different kind of layers. And just to show you, it's very easy to swap in the hierarchy template between different views. So what we were looking at before is the sunburst. It's kind of a radial circular representation, but you can move towards what we call a tree map, which is more kind of square orientation. And again, you can see this similar patterns. These are the people in poverty and how they're split. And just to kind of show you, there's another option, which is it's not moving on, sorry. Oh, maybe I didn't click it. Oh, sorry, you can have filters here, so you can just look at what this looks like for people with children. And here you can see actually people with children are the percentage of people with children. There's more children in poverty, more people in poverty who have children, because this has got slightly bigger than the 25%. And again, just to show you how you can play around between the different settings in hierarchy. So you can do this nested bubble chart if you think that is a better way of showing it, or the radial chart. And this is just to show you that maybe the first thing you did wasn't the best thing, and just to play around with different representations. Maybe, I don't think radial chart looks very good for this, but maybe this particular story and telling this particular story, and the sunburst for me works better. But fiddling around and looking at different chart types and how things are represented differently, as I keep going on about it, it is a process. So it is good to come at it from different ways and flick between different views. So that's the point of that. And so I am just going to rattle through these because we've only got 10 minutes. Again, the story in the descriptive title, this part to whole relationship being shown by the hierarchy template. So you want to see how something is being carved up or split down. The different layers to show the different proportions, and a filter to help focus on different segments of the population. Colour here was quite important, very distinctively drawing people to the people in poverty segments. And then, all the labeling of the segments makes it much easier to see what it's representing is actually telling the story. So I'm rattling through because I've got one last example to show you. So this is all storytelling using story editor in Flourish. But then just one more step on is what we call scrollytelling. And it uses slides in the storyteller to tell a story by scrolling by scroll. So someone's, rather than kind of pressing that play button and the story playing out in front of you in the story editor, or clicking on the arrows, manually, so someone steps the story themselves through the story at their own pace, we have something called scrollytelling, which is that you play through, people get taken through slides as they scroll their mouse. And I'm just going to show you this example. I don't know if Atlanta Council have done much scrollytelling, but just to show you what it's useful, what it does. Again, it's our master series, so this is on the Flourish blog, and I would definitely recommend looking at this. So this is inspired by another data visualization specialist, and this is, I really like this example because not only is it an example of scrollytelling, it's an example of choosing the right chart type and making decisions about chart design that speak to the story you want to tell. So here I'm scrolling through and text is coming onto the chart to take people through the messaging. So here, so COVID-19 data is typically shown on line charts where, because of this time series, they're showing a metric like weekly hospitalizations or weekly deaths on a line chart. Even when placed on the same line chart, it can be difficult to compare trends over time or see if there's any kind of relationship between them, especially if they're very different scales. We're stepping through moving this line chart towards a different chart by removing the lines to show the raw data points, which are currently for each week. There's 2 dots, one for each metric, and we're going to move this towards actually a scatter chart where we have a metric on each axis to show the relationship between them. And we're using scrollytelling, so I'm just scrolling through to step through the different points in the story. So now that animation is helping people to understand where the dots are. So now in the scatter plot view, each dot represents both metrics, hospitalizations on the x-axis and deaths on the y-axis. And we've lost the time dimension because we've moved from a time series line chart to a scatter chart. We can add in the time dimension by drawing a line between the dots. So this gives the chronologically ordered over time. And this is what we call a connected scatter plot. And this distinctive loop shape reveals like a meaning in the connected scatter plot. And it happens when one of the variables plotted rises and then falls and the other follows after a delay. So this is weekly deaths following, increasing after the weekly hospitalization rate has gone up. And in this case, we first see a rise in hospitalizations before the chart loops back as deaths peak about a week later. And with COVID-19, the data loop helps us identify waves of the virus. So in the UK, the same level of hospitalizations was seen in March and the week of April. But in April, we're starting to move down the chart. So hospitalizations are going down. Hospitalizations are going down, but deaths are going up here in this part of the chart. This type of chart helps us identify when we return to the same position we had previously. So in the UK, we had the same level of hospitalization and deaths in December as well. So this is the UK's 3rd wave. And then from there, things got worse. So now we can see that in our latest wave, we had much higher hospitalizations and deaths than we did in our first wave. So this is the loop here, the new loop. So I just wanted to show you this because it's one of our new blog posts, and it just fundamentally speaks to what I've been talking about today. All these kind of decisions about chart type, design, color, labeling, to tell your story. And then it brings this added dimension of storytelling through scrolling and people scrolling through different parts of the story. So I just thought it's just a great example to show in this kind of session. So we are nearly there, and I have a few minutes. So what we've covered in this session so far, why data storytelling is so important. There's loads of data and we want people to engage with it and understand it. We've gone through this 5-step best practice framework to help people build up the skill set needed to be good at data visualization and storytelling. The skill sets that we normally need is being good numerically, being good at communication and picking out stories and messaging, and design. So designing to those 2 things. And the framework that we have put into practice today and gone through many examples to reiterate these kind of 5 steps are Story is everything. Focusing on your story, picking it out in a descriptive title is the most important first step. And then picking the right chart type to back up that story and the relationship that you want to show. Picking the right metrics and the right axis decisions and sorting and all these numerical decisions need to be really, really thought about. Color and how color can add a different dimension, bring in different parts of the story and highlight different meanings, and using color to focus people's attention where you want them to focus it. And labels, so using annotation and pointers to point people to the messaging on the chart and the different events or things that are happening that you want them to focus on. So hopefully this has been a canter through. We have a few minutes left. Hopefully this has given you some kind of ideas about how to approach this in the future. And we have a few minutes if you have any questions. But if you have to go, that's absolutely fine. Feel free to email me after if there's anything you want to follow up on. And I hope you found it helpful.